Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History. This week you guys have requested that I do 5 of the richest families in Ireland. Of course this will be a debatable list and highly controversial, so I look forward to your comments below as we go over sources from the early medieval to the late. Without further ado, let's start our 5 richest families in Ireland, starting with the Bergs. Is the Berg family, who arrived in Ireland in 1185 with Henry II with the Anglo-Normans. At their peak, the Berg family had territories in Galway, Ulster and in Kent in England. They would quickly go on to become crusaders with Edward I, going off crusading around Jerusalem and various parts of the medieval world. When they would return, taking on more territory and land in Ireland. However, the family would take its first bump going into the Scottish War of Independence, when the Berg had married their family off to the Bruce's family. Massive marriage alliance and all the territory that the Bergs had and successful crusades, the Berg family were definitely one of the wealthiest in Ireland. However, it's from this point onwards that the Berg family start to get real bumpy, because with Robert the Bruce getting involved with the Scottish War of Independence against the Bergs' vassals, the King of England, the Bergs became untrustworthy amongst the English. Furthermore, the OConnors would also declare war on the Berg family, with Phelim O'Connor leading the attack against the Berg family. The Bergs were almost completely wiped out at the Second Battle of Athenry, with Edward the Bruce, Robert the Bruce's brother, moving into Ireland to quickly take as much territory as possible and being declared King of Ireland. The Berg family were really starting to get shook up, as the Scottish War of Independence really wasn't leaving them well. The Berg family would barely win the Battle of Athenry, and they would barely shake off and push out Edward the Bruce out of the country. The family had barely survived the Scottish War of Independence, and it had a little bit of breathing space before the 100 Years' War had kicked off. However, leading into the 100 Years' War, the Berg family would break into a civil war, when William de Burgh had placed Walter de Burgh, his own cousin, into an oubliette and let him starve to death. One of the bodyguards to the de Burgh family had gone into a pure rage and ended up butchering and murdering William de Burgh, causing the civil war to kick off amongst the family. This would leave the family divided, and they wouldn't be able to get back onto their feet until leading into the 16th century. Here we have the O'Connors. The O'Connors would hit their peak in 1103 when they would usurp the previous king of Ireland, Murtogh Obriens. In doing so, they would take the kingship of Ireland to an all-new height under Turlough O'Connor, who is Ireland's longest reigning king. He would build many moat baileys and beautiful pieces of art that would still stay in Ireland today, such as the Cross of Cong. His son, Rory O'Connor, would inherit the crown of Ireland. However, this would break into complete civil war against the MacLuchlans, with the O'Connors once again triumphing over the MacLuchlans. One particular party, Diarmid MacMurrough, wasn't too pleased, and he would go over to England and seek help from the Cambro-Normans. There, the Norman conquest of Ireland would begin, and the O'Connors would spend the rest of the medieval period struggling against the various Normans who pushed them all the way to Connacht, and would continue to wrestle the kingship of Connacht against them. However, the O'Connors, even fighting against the powerful the Bergs, would hold on and hold the kingship to themselves, finishing up in the late medieval period in 1460 as still being crowned kings of Connacht. Still today, Desmond O'Connor still holds the title as Prince of Connacht and head chieftain of Clan O'Connor. His father, Denis O'Connor, had fought in World War II, and after the war, his father would help with Irish tourism and help with the various lineages in Ireland. He would also help disabled children learn to ride. So although the O'Connors had hit their peak of wealth going into the high medieval period of Crusaders, and the O'Connors, even after the Norman invasion, had held on to their lands in Connacht, and even at their darkest of times, even at the Battle of Athenry, they would manage to hold on to their kingship of Connacht. At number 3, we have the Obriens. And just like the O'Connors, the Obriens see their peak very early on in the medieval era. In fact, the Obriens become one of the most powerfulest families in Ireland. Of course, everybody who studies Irish medieval history knows of Brian Boru and how he became Emperor of the Gael, taking over all of Ireland. However, with his death at the Battle of Clontarf, Ireland once again would go into a strife on who should become the next King of Ireland. By the skin of their teeth, the O'Briens managed to hold on for a short time before they themselves become usurped by the O'Connors. The Obriens stay as a little minor faction in Munster until the arrival of the Normans. The Obriens continue to try to fight off other clans and the Normans at the same time. The Obriens manage to stay fit, and going into the Scottish War of Independence, when we see the likes of the Bergs and the O'Connors really starting to struggle, the Obriens on the other hand start to really break off and start to push into an era of the Gaelic resurgence, winning the great battle of Dysa O'Dea in 1315. With that, the O'Briens start to really take off, and we can see the peak of their wealth with Bunratty Castle, which was originally built by the MacMurraghs in 1425. It comes into the ownership of the O'Briens much later on. Here we can really see the peak of O'Brien's wealth. The O'Briens still stand today as one of the wealthiest families in Ireland, led by Conor O'Brien, the 31st descendant of High King Brian Boru. Now, although this entire list is very debatable, and if this was the list of the most powerfulest factions and clans in Ireland, I would definitely put the ONeills at number 1. But because we're talking about the richest families in Ireland, sadly I'm going to have to place the ONeills at number 2. Now, that being said, the ONeills do drive up to being one of the most wealthiest families in Ireland. That is simply because the ONeills are related to a much more older family within the ONeills. They derive from the Northern Oneil and get their name from Niall Glondubh, who was a rival of Flann Sinna. Back when the Irish were pushing for a more unified Ireland, Niall Glondubh was one of the major rivals of Flann Sinna. Now, that's a completely different topic and a video I could easily do on the rise and fall of the King of Ireland, Flann Sinna. But for the time being, we'll follow the line of Niall Glondubh. His family itself was one of the major rivals to the O'Donnell clan at the time. And with the arrival of the Normans, because the O'Neills were a major rival to the O'Connor clan, the O'Neills would continue to rise up. They would eventually rebel against the MacLachlan clan and really put them down. Once they had put down the MacLachlans, they became one of the most powerful factions in the north of Ireland, and even managed to repel the Normans who would invade Ulster, the north of Ireland, multiple times. However, with that being said, in a previous video I had covered, the O'Neills would go on to become the last kings of Ireland, and this would sadly fail because at the time most of the Irish were beginning to switch from kingship to more of a parliament assembly system, so most of the Irish were going anti-monarchy. However, the O'Neills would very much adapt to this, making one of their greatest allies the Fitzgeralds, with the O'Neills becoming so dominant in the north of Ireland, especially going into the 100 Years' War, and really taking advantage of the Bergs' decline. The O'Neills were truly a powerful faction, and it becomes no surprise that at times the kings of England would even bribe and give gifts to the O'Neills for armies to fight both in the Scottish War of Independence and in the 100 Years' War, which goes to show how powerful the O'Neills were, and with that, aiming to get more wealth out of the English. The O'Neills themselves would eventually start to expand into Scotland, taking some territories in Scotland. The O'Neills were truly terrifying. Even the English themselves were terrified of the numbers of the O'Neills could gather. Some people would even speculate that O'Neill himself had over 8,000 men. How true this is can't be really verified, but it truly shows how wealthy O'Neill could have been to be able to feed and supply each one of these soldiers, and of course pay them at the end of the day. Number one, and I would be very interested if anybody wants to disagree with me on this one, but at number one I'm going to put the Fitzgeralds. And the Fitzgeralds definitely are one of the wealthiest families in Ireland. You can see that firsthand. The Fitzgeralds first come to Ireland in 1169 with the coming of the Cambro-Norman. From there, the Fitzgeralds take on rivalships against both the Gaelic clans and other Normans as they fight and divide land amongst themselves. Eventually, the Fitzgeralds will break into two branches. The Desmond Fitzgeralds, mostly around the Kerry, West Cork area, and the Kildare Fitzgeralds, who were mostly around the Meath and Central Ireland areas. From there, the Fitzgeralds are able to make an alliances both with the Gaelic of Ireland and the various Normans. This didn't come unnoticed, with various English families completely disagreeing with the Fitzgeralds, constantly referring to them as the Irish family and the Irish nobility, simply because there were many members of the Fitzgeralds who couldn't speak English whatsoever, and never did. Although there were members of the Fitzgeralds clan, particularly the Kildare Fitzgeralds, that did go to private schools in England to further their education. For the most part, the Fitzgeralds were seen as a very Gaelic Renaissance style family, with the likes of Garrod, the poet Fitzgerald, being highly influenced by the Italian Renaissance. In fact, it wouldn't take very long until the Fitzgeralds themselves were able to link themselves to a family in Florence and become good allies, trading various wools and wolfhounds with the Florentines, bringing Ireland into a golden renaissance. From here, the Fitzgeralds would end up becoming one of the wealthiest families in both Ireland and Britain. Irish nobility starting to appear in Italy, England, and in the Holy Roman Empire, and even in the French courts. The Fitzgeralds, with their wealth, sure played the Game of Thrones well, and even the English coming to the end of the War of the Roses really marked this. Sure, you can still see for yourself. Half of what's described in this period of great Gaelic castles can be seen in the Waterford Museum. With the beautiful golden vestments, one gets a really spectacular idea of what Ireland was like just before the coming of the English invasions later on from 1534 upwards. Ireland in the 1400s must have been a great and wealthy place, from trade going from Ireland all the way through the Silk Road and to China. Even Silken Thomas had gotten his name from all the silk he was wearing at the period, which just goes to show how well connected the Fitzgeralds truly were. Anyway, other than that, guys, that's my top 5 richest families in Ireland. Bit controversial perhaps, very debatable, and that's why I really look forward to seeing what you guys have to say in the comment section. As always, guys, definitely subscribe to the channel and click the old follow button or whatever buttons are there. Also, have a look at the old merch. That's pretty much keeping the channel going for the time being. And if you ever want to chat, we're over in Clans and Dynasties, Instagram, Twitter, the whole shebang. So obviously leave us a message and have a good old chat with us on Facebook for most of the time. Anyway, guys, hope you all the best and later.